Let's talk a little bit about the Heisman Trophy here and the Heisman Watch, Wes, because not to say the games should all matter the same, right? They should matter in September the same as they do potentially in November as you get to the Heisman Watch here. But that's not always the case. We know that, right? So C.J. Stroud now, it feels like he was kind of laying in the weeds there when Ohio State had the early loss to Oregon and kind of maybe fell off the map. Not completely, not off our radar, but maybe just in the general public. Now you look at him here and you go, whoa, plus 500 going forward. And you look at the numbers. I mean, they're really, really good on a really, really good team that's going to have their own destiny in their hands to go to the college football playoff. That loss to Oregon, notwithstanding, it feels like that's not even going to be a problem anymore with Alabama's loss and the way the rest of the season's played out. So when you look at C.J. Stroud potentially on a college football playoff team at plus 500, any value there for you? Is it already gone?
Well, it was 8-1 last week, and it never really got too high into the teens here. But like I keep saying, the concern for C.J. Stroud is, does he get into like a Mac Jones situation last year where it's like, oh my God, he's got so many weapons. You know, he's got so much NFL talent around him where it's like, oh, you can put just anybody in there and they can win it. Look, Justin Fields last year. So it's like, they just get 5 stars out the wazoo. Right. So we're not going to reward him. I think that that's kind of a mistake, and I think that that's unfair. I think you got to reward a guy for production, but Ohio State has so many weapons. But to see him cut down to 5-1, because it does seem like, and it really, I think it was Greg Schiano at Rutgers kind of said, okay, they're back. You know, because they were kind of sluggish against Tulsa that following week
right.
when they lost to Oregon at the Horseshoe. And then all of a sudden they went and waylaid Rutgers, and then they put 66 on Maryland, and they're starting to score points. It was 54-7 in Bloomington last week against Indiana, and could have been much worse, by the way.
Yeah.
I mean, Ryan Day could have hung in the 60s on Indiana and elected not to, elected to go with the second and third unit guys. Thank God, because it could have been much worse in Bloomington. You might not have had any spectators left there except Ohio State fans. But anyway, I do think 5-1 probably is a fair price. And we've seen a little drift on Matt Corral up to about 5-2. Bryce Young's still the favorite. So we haven't seen much change there, I don't think, at the top. But Stroud, I think, clearly is that guy lurking. If one of those two has a bad game, then all of a sudden they get pushed out and Stroud goes into that spot.
I love your point about Schiano, though. How many times do you hear an opposing coach after they get their tails kicked go, oh, they're back, and Ohio State is back?
Well, he was right.
He was right. They are. They certainly look like they're on that steamroller. I'm with you on that. It feels like right there, Stroud, even at 5-1, to your point last week, 8-1 would have been better value, but he feels like a live player here as Ohio State feels like they're hitting their stride. Okay, I've been on Pittsburgh. By the way, Miami did score, so you're looking pretty good right there with that smart play, getting the 9.5 pre-flop. It's 7-all right now. A lot of points going to happen today in Pittsburgh.
Yeah, I know.
My
I mean,
goodness.
This could go south in a hurry, depending on what side you're on, because there are going to be a lot of opportunities to score. I believe this total closed at 61 at BetMGM. This was the opener of 62. And they're scoring so fast, I don't have any live lineups, so we will update for you momentarily. But nice job by Tyler Van Dyke, the freshman out of the state of Connecticut, 4-star guy, who is meant to be a backup, but I think is a better fit for that offense. And just as I say that, Pitt minus 7.5 at BetMGM, 69.5 on the total.
69.5. Woo! Speaking of Pitt, and speaking of the Heisman watch here, let's talk about Kenny Pickett, because you want to talk about dark horses that are like a thoroughbred coming down the finishing stretch here, 10-1 all of a sudden. And if you like C.J. Stroud's numbers, my goodness, look at Kenny Pickett's. Mm-hmm. I mean, they are astounding. So again, level of competition might be a little bit different, but so would say the Ohio State people, because really the numbers are almost identical. C.J. Stroud's number, QBR, is a little bit higher than Kenny Pickett's, but Kenny Pickett's overall, he's got one more touchdown and about, 250 more yards and 2 less INTs. What do you make of that number on a team that should not be relatively unknown? We've been talking about Kenny Pickett, feels like, for a decade at Pittsburgh, so he's a known commodity. But I guess they look at it and sometimes go, well, it's the ACC. It's really down. He's putting up numbers against teams that just, quite frankly, aren't very good. Do you think that's going to hold him back at 10-1?
It very well could, because remember when we were talking about him a couple weeks ago against Virginia Tech, 28-7, kind of one of the first low-scoring games that Pitt had all year, and it was like, Kenny Pickett's 35-1 out there. What about him? And then all of a sudden he got cut to 25-1. And then all of a sudden he got cut in the teens, and now he's at 10-1 because they finally had like a showcase game. I think it was mid-afternoon, that 3:30 Eastern kickoff on ABC. That was their television window against Clemson, where it's kind of like, oh, here's Pittsburgh, because I think a lot of the national media didn't know, because it's like they get lost a little bit in the shuffle with some of the other bigger games. So now you're seeing a Pittsburgh that all of a sudden is 7-1. They do lead the Coastal Division at 3-0, only undefeated team there, really control their own destiny. On the other side in the Atlantic, Wake Forest controls its own destiny at 4-0 in the conference. So look, I think now the word is out on Kenny Pickett. The word is absolutely out. We were talking about him. He was 35-1.
Oh, yeah.
And now he's 10-1. He's the fourth choice on the board. Only Bryce Young, Matt Corral, and C.J. Stroud are ahead of him. And then, of course, Caleb Williams has now been cut. And sometimes these guys get cut not just on bets, but because books don't want any more exposure.
Oh.
They don't want to leave a cookie out there for you on some of these guys. Look, for Wake Forest, we saw Sam Hartman. Now, he's still a longer shot at 50-1, but he was 100-1 last week. Wow. When Ben Wilson and I were in here kind of talking about him with Dave Miller. It's like, well, what about Sam Hartman now? This team is undefeated. They just put a 70 burger on Army. So, there's always a lot of movement, and I think people are always willing to kind of look at some of these guys down the board because they saw with Devontae Smith, the receiver from Alabama last year, at one point was 200-1.